For a lot of our investors, I think they had largely written the company off and were like, yeah, the company's just dead. It's not going to go anywhere. I mean, it just felt like chewing glass. It's incredibly difficult. You're totally emotionally raw. You have no idea if you're going to make it to the next week, let alone the next month. I think there were also a lot of questions like, what do you know about healthcare? Like, what do you know about aviation or aerospace? Like, you have no expertise. Like, why would you be able to succeed at this? That was probably the worst and most difficult time I've ever had to go through, like, in my life. I mean, it's just so scary. There's like all these team members who are relying on you. We had to get lucky, and it also helped that we were just totally stubborn and hard-headed, and we're doing this. No one's going to get in our way. I'm Keller Clifton. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zipline. I didn't even really know that entrepreneurship was a thing you could do graduating from college, but I read Delivering Happiness, which was this book by Tony Hsieh. And I was kind of blown away because Tony and his partner, Alfred Lin, had built these amazing businesses coming out of college, and they'd actually both lived in the same dorm that I lived in college. I sent an email to Tony. He actually gave us an apartment in this apartment building where he had rented all these apartments in Las Vegas. We started building these cell phone robots that we were selling on Kickstarter at the time out of that apartment. We just started mailing robots to people that you could plug your iPhone into that would become this little robot that would run around inside your house. The company was called Remotive. And Tony ended up introducing me to Alfred about 6 months later. Alfred came out and hung out in the apartment with us for a couple days, and Sequoia became our first institutional investor. I think ultimately when we started shipping that first product for Remotive, it started to become pretty clear to us that consumer robotics was not the right place to start. The more we thought about it, the more we learned. We started to understand that you really want repetitive use cases and you want controlled environments. This was the reason that robots had already at that time scaled pretty dramatically in warehouses, in some hospitals. And I remember going and seeing, there's actually this company, Kiva Robotics, which actually Alfred was one of the first people to work with when they were at Zappos. And I got to go to one of the Kiva warehouses and see these orange robots running around inside on the floor inside this warehouse, moving things back and forth. They would go and pick up a shelf and bring it to a human packer. And I remember seeing that thinking, man, somebody's going to do that for outside the warehouse. And that's going to be one of the biggest companies in the world.
My wife, as an epidemiologist, and kept telling me about these projects in public health, they get stuck on logistics, things like vaccine campaigns where they have the vaccines, they have the doctors, and the logistics of actually getting the vaccines where they need to be when they're needed just kills the whole project. And that's one of the things that inspired us to go dig into that and really see what that was, solving medical supply logistics with drones.
The more we learned about global logistics, the more we understood that, this is a market that really only serves the golden billion humans on Earth well. If you're the 7 billion people who aren't in the golden billion, your access either sucks or is non-existent. As a result of that, millions of people, mainly children, die every year due to lack of access to basic medical products. The more we understood about that, we thought, man, somebody's going to build an automated logistics system for Earth. And that would be something we would be very proud to spend a decade of our lives working on.
Personally, as a very huge tech skeptic, I was like, all right, we're going to go spend time in the field and understand a million reasons why we could never make a dent in this problem. And the deeper we got, the more convinced we were that we actually could solve this problem and that we should go for it.
I think it's worth pointing out that all of our investors thought focusing on logistics was an extremely stupid thing to do. And I think there were also a lot of questions like, what do you know about healthcare? Like, what do you know about aviation or aerospace? Like, you have no expertise. Like, why would you be able to succeed at this?
Quite literally, everything was at stake during this transition. I mean, we, fully shut down the toy company, set up an auto reply saying, click this link and we'll give you a full refund. So we kind of fully closed that door before knowing which door we were going to open next.
We started going to places where we felt a new transformational kind of logistics system would just be undeniably valuable. We wanted to go, and healthcare was an obvious place to start because we thought it's life-saving, high willingness to pay, It doesn't have to be perfect on day one if you're adding a lot of value to customers' lives. And then we also needed a public healthcare system. We didn't want to have to go, hospital by hospital with private hospitals trying to convince them to use the system. We wanted to find, hey, what's a country where we could go partner with the public healthcare system and deliver things autonomously. And so we were looking in Central America, we were looking in Africa, starting to talk to governments. It ended up being Rwanda, this first country that really took a bet on us, saying, yeah, you should build that here, and we would use it and we would pay for it.
The nature of Rwanda's topography is that it's super hilly. So if you look in a sky map, it's 40 miles away. It could be anywhere from 3 to 6 hour drive, depending on the weather condition. The conventional logistics system is insufficient in solving the problem. The other thing was there's no standard operating procedures for how you pack and fly and receipt blood that was just delivered from the sky.
I think probably the biggest thing that we realized, maybe the biggest crucible moment for us, was understanding that the vehicle is only 15% of the complexity of the problem. We had thought, we're going to design this really cool robot. We're going to design this really cool autonomous aircraft. It's going to deliver things autonomously. But it turns out that in a national scale logistics system, there are a lot of different kinds of software and systems that all have to be interacting in concert to actually have an instant delivery service that people can rely on with their lives.
We didn't really know anything about before we had a package. We thought that we could order, the hospitals can place order via a nice iPad interface. I visited some of the health facilities. They barely had cell coverage in most parts of the hospital. And by the way, they're always on the move. So it's not it's a luxury to be I'm going to run back to this place where, there's a computer or whatever for me to place an order. And so we designed an ordering system that was just phone-based and WhatsApp-based.
We didn't know this until we launched, but Rwanda has some of the most volatile weather of any country on Earth. And so we were operating in lightning storms, rainstorms, insane dust storms.
We knew we'd be flying very low over mountains. So before we went to Rwanda, we engaged with our friends at NASA, the world experts in this low altitude modeling of the airspace. And they sort of, were scratching their heads for a minute. And they're now that we think about it, we've never actually had the data from flying low over mountains and storms because no one does that.
The moment the vision for Zipline really clicked for me was when we got past the idea of a quadcopter and really started to think deeply about an airplane. At first, it seemed totally preposterous. Wait, how are you going to make an airplane work for this? And I think it was only a few days of thought experiment and whiteboarding out that we started to realize, hey, the number one thing we were hearing from our customers is each additional kilometer that you can get outside of a region's biggest city is that much more value. We started talking to some experts and realized a pretty small little airplane could fly pretty fast, extremely efficiently, and range estimates for that, 10x, 20x, 30x what a quadcopter could do.
I think back to when we were getting very close to shipping. And at that point, we knew it was Rwanda. We knew exactly what the use case was. It was blood delivery. We knew that most of those blood deliveries were going to go to bleeding out and childbirth. And the Minister of Health started sending us photos of mothers who had passed away. That was one of those moments that was incredibly intense, but also incredibly clarifying. When you have that in front of you, all kind of academic debates about technology decisions go out the window. Because you know exactly what your customer needs and why they needed it and when they needed it. And not only was that super motivating, but focusing. So we knew we were only doing what we absolutely had to do to get that first version out the door.
I remember the first time the Rwandan Civil Aviation Authority came to visit our distribution center because we have to get approval to fly beyond visual line of sight. Otherwise, how do you deliver to the hospitals? Because we never had regulatory to fly beyond visual line of sight. It meant that we've done the length of the flight by kind of circling around just our test sites and whatnot, but we've never actually had a zip, disappear into the horizon. We had to walk them through all of our procedures, do all the pre-flight checks and everything. And then the moment the zip launched and then it, 10 seconds later, it disappeared into the horizon. I think the whole company stopped breathing. you just never seen it before. It was the very first time we were seeing it. And, we were also kind of looking at the iPad, you're like looking down on the iPad to make sure everything's okay, because it's still monitoring the zip, saying, sending data packets back to be like, it's about to deliver, it's coming back. And we just kept looking down and up, like, is it coming back yet? Is it back yet? And then finally, when it like came back, like, I think it was like it felt like the longest, like 5 minutes of our lives. We ran back inside the tent, made sure they couldn't see us. And then we started just screaming and jumping up and down, because that was the very first time any of us had ever seen an actual beyond visual line of sight flight.
We got the service launched. We turned on one hospital.
And then everything broke again for the next, 8 months as we had to like fix things and iterate. So, the first year of operating commercially was extraordinarily painful, basically like nonstop, all-nighters, nothing working, constant rocks in the gears. And then once it was working well for that hospital, it was clearly saving lives. Then it was like, can we expand to 21 different hospitals? Interestingly, that only took us about 3 months. It was 9 months to get the first hospital working, and then 3 months to get to all the 20 other hospitals that we had signed up to serve. Today Zipline serves about 5,000 hospitals and health facilities globally. We've just crossed 100 million commercial autonomous miles, and it's become the largest commercial autonomous system on Earth. But I think the other thing that really helped us is that we had one customer who believed in us and was willing to bet on us. And the Ministry of Health and the minister, she had made this bet on us, and we were pretty hell-bent on showing that the technology could at least do that one basic thing, which was to deliver blood instantly to those 21 hospitals. And 7 years after that conversation, I was meeting with this minister, and she told me, oh yeah, Keller, you never knew, but the reason we said yes was that just that morning, I had gotten this email had gone around the Ministry of Health about this mom who had lost her life because it took us like 9 hours to get a blood transfusion to her, and she had passed away by the time we got it to her. And I remember thinking, like, this is so screwed up. There has to be a better way. And that afternoon, you happened to walk in. Most hardware companies die before shipping anything. But then there's like another crucible moment, which is like the second product. The initial platform that Zipline built, which we creatively called Platform One, that system was really designed specifically with healthcare delivery in mind, and it was designed to operate at national scale.
Customers have been asking us for years, let's not just serve outside these metro areas, let's serve inside the metro area. And we're like, no, we don't do that. We don't do that. We don't do that. And once we had told every customer that over and over and over for a couple of years, it's a pretty good sign that you maybe should think about trying to solve that problem.
Overall, like logistics directly to homes, building instant delivery and what we thought of as teleportation directly to homes was basically almost an infinitely large market. We then started using that product in 2020 to deliver to homes, and it was clear to us that there was demand for many tens of billions of deliveries every year for this kind of a service. And it was also clear that Platform One wasn't going to be able, the overall architecture of the system was not designed to serve millions of homes in a suburban or even in an urban location.
So Keenan led its small team to really de-risk it from a technology standpoint. Like, could we actually tackle some of these use cases? And what would the design look like? How crazy is it going to be?
When we set out to first build Platform 2, Keenan was leading this new products team, and they came up with this crazy contraption where the aircraft undocks, flies up high, flies along, and from altitude on a string, it lowers down a second robot. And that second robot is going to be silent and safe and small. And that is going to leave the package behind. Frankly, I thought Keenan might have been insane. It's like, this sounds really cool, but there's no way this thing's going to work. Keenan convinced us to pull a small little tiger team onto this project and work on a medium fidelity prototype. And we invited everyone from the company to come out and see this delivery experience. Keenan basically posed this challenge to pretty much the company, which is come see what this delivery experience is like. And if you have as much conviction as we do in this, let's bet the company on it.
And the night before the bit that we met as a leadership team and as a board to have that discussion, Ryan texts me and says, I'm going to try to kill the concept tomorrow. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, all right, Ryan hasn't seen this demo yet. So let's see what happens.
That might be the last time I ever doubted Keenan.
By noon that day, Ryan was like, all right, how fast can we ship this thing? So
Seeing that early concept of Platform 2 totally changed everything for me.
Platform 2 really marks the next stage of growth for the company. While I think back to 2016 and we were gearing up to launch the 21 hospitals in Rwanda, and in some ways it almost feels familiar because we're trying to launch like this, similar number of stores for Walmart at this very moment.
For a decade, it's been clear that getting permission to fly beyond visual line of sight in the U.S. is really the holy grail from a regulatory perspective. And Zipline in 2023 became the first company in U.S. history to be awarded like full approval to fly beyond visual line of sight in all 50 states in the United States. And it was a milestone 10 years in the making, because we had started building Zipline in 2013, thinking that ultimately, like, will this ever be possible? It was not clear. Will this ever be allowed? It was not clear. And so, 10 years later, we were approved for full-scale commercial operations in the U.S. The thing that ultimately does kill most early-stage startups is like, the team just gives up. And at some point, it becomes screwed up enough. The situation becomes screwed up enough. Enough people leave. Enough investors just kind of like consider the company to be dead, that the people will eventually just give up and the company dies. I think probably Zipline is a good example of like, but what if you actually just didn't? What if, even though it was like super bad and it was not possible to raise money for the company and everybody thought it was a stupid idea, and most of the investors thought the company was dead, many people had left the company because it didn't seem very promising. But what if you just didn't and just kept going and like kept working all-nighters? And I think that there were a few of us who were pretty darn unwilling to give up.